Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans. I'm excited today to have joining me best-selling author, an end-time expert, and a regular guest here, Bill Salus. Bill is the founder of Prophecy Depot Ministries. He's written many end-times books, produced many DVDs. He's an author and a speaker that I respect greatly, and he's here today to talk about the war that's happening in Israel right now and where he believes this is going prophetically. This is going to be a very important discussion. Well, Bill, you have the perspective on, Israel and Bible prophecy really like no one I've ever seen. You talk about the Psalm 83 war, Gog and Magog, all of the coming wars, the present wars. But you have a perspective, and you were on the program not too long ago talking about the Psalm 83 war specifically. But I've heard you recently talking about Zechariah 12. And this is something that I think Zechariah 12 is a very, common end-time scripture that talks about Jerusalem, Judah and Jerusalem. But why don't you start by talking about your perspective on Zechariah 12 concerning the present time?
Absolutely, Jimmy. I'm watching Zechariah 12, 1 through 6 very closely because I think it's about to find fulfillment. And what it's telling us is that the Arab-Israeli conflict is going to conclude militarily, not through politically brokered peace deals. Of course, as we air this program right now, the whole world is clamoring at a fever pace for a two-state solution. But that's not biblically endorsed, and Benjamin Netanyahu and his administration are vehemently opposed to that for justifiable reasons, Jimmy.
That's exactly right. You think there's going to be a military solution in the near term?
I do, because when we look at what happened on October 7th with the Hamas massacre, it appears that Pandora's box was opened in the Middle East. The genie got out of the bottle. It's not going to be put back into the bottle, and the lid's not going to be closed on Pandora's box. I've been watching for a long time to see if some of the prophecies involving the Israeli Defense Forces, who exist in numerous biblical prophecies, I've been watching to see when those things might find their final fulfillment. And presently, I'm thinking that time is about now, Jimmy. I think that the military wars are about to happen that conclude the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Let's talk about kind of where we are now and kind of progressing forward. Now, so the Psalm 83 war is a war between Israel and their surrounding neighbors, okay, their immediate neighbors. And so obviously, we've seen in the news where Israel's now fighting a 7-front war, basically a 360 war. And so talk about the Psalm 83 war and what you believe is going to happen between now and when there is a military result.
Yes, I think there's a sequence of events that are probably going to happen that will conclude with the climactic war, final battle over Judah and Jerusalem in Zechariah 12. But as far as Psalm 83 goes, just for your viewers who are maybe not that familiar with it, have maybe perhaps not seen our prior programs, Psalm 83 talks about a confederacy of the Arab states and terrorist populations within them that surround Israel. It was written about 3,000 years ago by the worship leader of King David, Asaph, but who was also a prophet, we're told in 2 Chronicles 29:30. And he predicted that the time would come where Lebanon, where of course you have Hezbollah, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Palestinians, in ancient Edom, now they're Palestinian refugees today, the Gaza, where the Hamas are, that they would come together in a confederate effort to cut the nation of Israel off, that the name of Israel would be remembered no more. And of course, we saw a precursor of that in 1948, but that did not fulfill the prophecy. So ultimately, we're looking for that prophecy to find a final fulfillment. And when it does, it enables Israel to dwell securely in the midst of the land, a peaceful, tranquil people. They can tear down the walls that they've got inside of Israel and surrounding Israel. And that sets the stage for another big prophecy, Ezekiel 38 and 39, that deals with countries that form an outer ring of countries, don't share common borders with Israel, including Russia, Turkey, and Iran, and more. And most of your viewers may be familiar with that prophecy. But that prophecy is very important because that's the one that God's going to stop supernaturally. It's too formidable of an offense for Israel to stop it with their defense forces. God will stop it with a great earthquake. That earthquake will cause panic among the troops. It says every man's sword will be against his brother. Then there'll be flooding rains, great hailstones, pestilence, and bloodshed. And of course, the world will know that that was the God of the Jews that did that. And it says after God does that, that he will make his holy name known in the midst of his people Israel. They shall not profane his holy name anymore, and the nation shall know he's the Holy One of Israel. That's in Ezekiel 39:7. But we're not ready for that yet because Israel does not dwell securely. The walls are still up, and the walls serve their purpose to keep the Psalm 83 countries out from invading Israel. And I think that we're heading now for the final battle in Zechariah 12 that will conclude Psalm 83. And again, this is militarily, not politically. And so what we're seeing in all the hustle and bustle with the international community and all the clamor, put a sense of urgency for a two-state solution so that Israel will normalize relationships with Saudi Arabia and all the Arab states. Well, that's just not going to happen in my estimation.
So at some point in time, there's going to be a diplomatic solution with the Antichrist. And there's going to be this answer man that comes on the scene. He makes a false peace with Israel that obviously he breaks 3.5 years into it. And you see that happening in the future pretty good. I mean, in other words, if there's going to be a Psalm 83 war and then peace, do you see the Gog-Magog war happening before the Antichrist or after?
I see Psalm 83 preceding Ezekiel 38, and I see Ezekiel 38 preceding the tribulation period for several reasons. One reason, not the primary one, was one I just talked about. God is going to make his holy name known in the midst of his people Israel, so that he's going to give the world official notice that he's the God of Israel, the covenant-keeping God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the promise-keeping God who put their faith in Jesus Christ. And I believe he's going to do that before the Antichrist comes on the scene and tries to manipulate and influence people otherwise thinking they should worship him and take his mark of the beast. So I think that's one of the reasons. The other reason I think it's pre-tribulation, and many of my colleagues would agree with this, is we're given a detail in Ezekiel 39 after that supernatural defeat of the enemies that the Jewish people will be burning the weapons that these enemies bring forward, converting them into fuel for a 7-year period. Now, when you understand that 7 years as it would align itself in end times prophecies, if the Ezekiel 38 battle was defeated and stopped 3.5 years prior to the 7-year tribulation period, they'd have 3.5 years to start converting those Russian weapons to fuel. And then the first half of the tribulation, after they've signed, the Antichrist has confirmed a covenant with Israel for a 7-year period. We find that out in Daniel 9:27 and Isaiah 28 verses 15, this covenant. Then the first half of that 7-year tribulation period, Israel's dwelling in peace. Now it's a pseudo-peace because it's going to be violated at the mid part of the tribulation period when the Antichrist comes on the scene, invades Jerusalem, and goes into the temple and does the abomination of desolation. At that point, even Jesus Christ says in Matthew 24, verse 15, that the Jewish people should flee immediately into the desert, into the mountains, which would be southern Jordan, the Petra area, because Zechariah 13:8 would then come, where the Antichrist would try to commit genocide of the Jews. And it says in Zechariah 13:8 that 2/3 of the Jews will be cut off in all the land. 1/3, we're told in verse 9, will become a remnant that will make it through. So in my estimation, they could burn weapons and convert it to fuel for the first 3.5 years before the tribulation, the first 3.5 years in the first part of the tribulation. But in the second half of the tribulation, they're fleeing, they're not fighting. If anything, they're going to grab a weapon to defend themselves and not convert it to fuel.
Well, in other words, looking at the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war, for the first 3.5 years, there are no wars. They're at peace. The second half, there's no victories. In other words, they're running for their lives. There's not this, in the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war, God miraculously prevails, and the God of Israel is known throughout the earth. That doesn't happen during the tribulation, the first half or the second half. And I agree with you on that. Well, let's go back. The Israel is under incredible pressure from the world, and now the Biden administration is also ratcheting up the pressure, basically telling Israel when this Hamas war is over with, including a ceasefire before they invade Rafah, that the United States is ready to unilaterally recognize the Palestinian state. 139 nations of the United Nations already recognize the Palestinian state. And so America is now saying that we're ready to do that. I believe it was last Sunday, the cabinet, Netanyahu's cabinet, voted that they would not recognize any recognition of a two-state solution by the rest of the world. So this is They're under a lot of pressure. So you think that this is an opportunity now for the Israeli Defense Forces to kind of take over?
Well, like I said, I don't think there's any way to turn back the clock now with the prophecies. The stage has been set for quite some time. But at this point, I think that we're going to find a fulfillment of Psalm 83, probably Isaiah 17, the destruction of Damascus, maybe Jeremiah chapter 49, verses 34 through 39, where we see a disaster in the west coast side of Iran, another prophecy involving Iran versus Ezekiel 38. So I do see these things all coming into play. The push of the Biden administration is just putting lipstick on the same political pig. In other words, Clinton tried to do it in Camp David in 2000. That failed miserably when Ehud Barak was the prime minister and Yasser Arafat was in charge of the Palestinian Authority. George Bush tried followed those same failed presidential footsteps, 2006, 2007 time frame. John Kerry, as the Secretary of State in 2013, 2014, tried the same thing with the Obama administration. This is nothing new. In order for Saudi Arabia to normalize relationships, they're going to ask for a two-state solution. That's the big carrot. They want Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords and normalize relationships with Israel. But they're going to force the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002, which they put forward, Saudi Arabia, which has some real no-goes for Israel. And it includes a new problem, too. The new problem, and I'll explain the other prerequisites of the Arab Peace Initiative, is that they want a lot of the settlements in the West Bank to be abandoned, which of course was the problem. That's what the problem with the Gaza in 2005 was. They abandoned the Gaza, and now look what they had to do to survive. They went through the massacre. Now they're fighting inside the Gaza to try to, have security in the nation. But it also calls for an East Jerusalem to be the capital of the Palestinian state, right of return of the Palestinians back into all of Israel proper, not just the West Bank. And also for Israel to concede the land that they acquired in the Six-Day War of 1967. So in other words, give us land and we'll give you peace, as if Saudi Arabia is going to be able to control and normalize. And the carrot on this is that Saudi Arabia says, well, the Arab states will start to normalize relationships with Israel and be at peace with them. But there's no way that Saudi Arabia is going to be able to contain and control the vast majority of Muslims that absolutely hate Israel.
Absolutely.
There's no way that's going to happen.
Okay, Bill, we'll pick up there in just a second. Let me say, if you're watching right now and you're not a subscriber to endtimes.com, I want you to become a subscriber. And right now we have a 7-day free trial that you can sign up for endtimes.com. Try us out for 7 days. You can see the full Tipping Point show that you're watching today without ads. Also on Thursday, we have Mark Hitchcock, who's one of the greatest end times experts in the world today. He has a podcast here on endtimes.com every Thursday. Brian Schrager from Israel every Tuesday. I give a prophecy perspective every Monday. We answer questions every Friday. And I have a devotional that comes out every Sunday. We have all kinds of things that come out all week long to keep you encouraged, to keep you blessed and educated on what's happening in the world today, especially related to the end times. So go to endtimes.com right now, sign up for a free trial for 7 days. And after the 7 days, if you want to stay with us, it's $7 a month. It's the best $7 I believe that you could ever spend to keep yourself encouraged in the severe times that we're living in times when Bible prophecy is coming true right before our eyes. $7 a month, but you have a 7-day free trial right now at endtimes.com. Let's go back to Bill. And Hamas is extremely popular among all Palestinians, not just in Gaza. And the Palestinians want Hamas to rule them rather than the Palestinian Authority. Can you imagine a worse nightmare for Israel than to have a state recognized alongside of them, which now puts Hamas in East Jerusalem, in the West Bank, and in Gaza? So it's just a nightmare. Well, let's go to Zechariah 12, Bill. And so you have I so much appreciate your perspective on all end time prophecy. But Zechariah 12 through 14 is a very, very important end time prophecy. Give us what you're looking at related to the fulfillment of that.
I will, and I want to caveat that what I'm about to say as I go through these first 6 verses of Zechariah 12, that most scholars for the ages and even today believe that what I'm about to say is related to Armageddon. Or I believe it's not. I believe it's a separate and entirely different siege that takes place inside of Judah and Jerusalem versus the one that happens in Zechariah chapter 14, verses 1 through 3, which is dealing with all the nations that captured Jerusalem in those passages. And time permitting, we can compare that. So what I'm about to do is lay out the first 6 verses as I interpret them. I ask your viewers not to take my word for it, but at the same token, I do think this could be actually what we should be watching for. I think it will lead to the final solution of the conflict of the Arab-Israeli age-old conflict. And I think that we're heading toward that in the very near future. So what it says in Zechariah 12, verses 2 and 3, verses 2 says, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling," or in some in translations, intoxication, unto all the peoples round about the surrounding nations, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. So we have a siege that's forthcoming, and it's not involving all the nations of the world. It's involving the surrounding nations. Every translation that you look at will tell you it's involving the surrounding nations. And the Hebrew word is sabiev. And it clearly talks about the neighborhood, the neighbors around Israel. The surrounding nations at some point are going to lay a final siege against Judah and Jerusalem. Now, it's going to be an unsuccessful siege, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. But that is what they're going to do. Remember, Jerusalem is the third holiest city in Islam. Of course, it's where the Temple Mount is, and the Dome of the Rock, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And even though it's not mentioned at one time in the Quran, they still hold fast to the fact that that's their third holiest city. Now, when this siege takes place, the international community is going to go in an uproar and meddle. And it says in the next verse, "And in that day I shall make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people, all that burden themselves with it," all those that meddle, the United Nations, the international community, etc., that meddle with it, "shall be cut into pieces, though all peoples of the earth will be gathered," or in some translations, assembled against it. So what I see happening there is that the Arab states, the surrounding peoples, are going to make a final ditch effort to take over Israel, namely Judah and Jerusalem, the capital. And they're going to try to lay siege, and they're going to have support, the full support of the international community. To do that, the international community is going to meddle. God saying, "Don't do that. I'm making Jerusalem a cup of trembling. I'm making it a cup of trembling. Don't get involved. It's going to be a burdensome stone. If you attempt to, it will sorely wound you or cut you into pieces," in some translations. So that's what the stage is being set for. Now we currently see, I'm going to give you an example. This is where most people would say, well, it says all nations, Bill, in verse 3. Why can't they be all the nations in Zechariah chapter 14 or Joel 3 or Armageddon in Revelation 19 or Revelation 16? And I'll give you some quotes in a moment. But I think what we need to understand here is in modernity, there's precedence for the international community meddling with Judah and Jerusalem, especially Jerusalem. I'll talk a little bit about the history if I can, Jimmy, and then we'll see how it's more than intensified now than ever, like you mentioned with the Biden administration and the whole world clamoring for a two-state solution. But we start back in 1947 with UN Resolution 181, which was the partition plan, which called for Israel to become a nation. The United Nations approved that. 1948, of course, the Arabs didn't vote for the Israel to become a nation. They voted against it, and they went to war against Israel in 1948. But in the UN Resolution 181, it called for Israel to be restored as a nation, but Jerusalem was to be an international zone. They were already meddling even back when Israel became a nation. Of course, in 1967, the Six-Day War, Israel won that war. Egypt, Jordan, and Syria had joined from the Psalm 83 countries, and Israel won that war in 6 days. And they took over all of Jerusalem. Oh, excuse me, let me backtrack. After the war in 1948, I got ahead of myself. There was the Armistice Agreement, where they actually divided Jerusalem in half. Israel won the war in 1948. Jerusalem got divided in half, the first time ever, and that's not biblically endorsed. Jerusalem is never to be a divided city. And it didn't last more than 20 years, because in 1967, going back to what I was saying, in the 6-Day War, Israel won and took over all of Jerusalem, and no longer was it a divided city. However, Israel made the colossal mistake of giving control of the Temple Mount to Jordan, the Waqf, W-A-Q-F, Antiquities Society. So we already see meddling has gone on in 1948, 1949, 1967. We saw the presidents of America, we talked about this earlier, trying to create a two-state solution. And now it's come to a fever pitch where they want to make Jerusalem divide Jerusalem and give it a two-state solution and give East Jerusalem to the Palestinians as a capital. Now, that's only going to get worse when this siege happens. The international community is going to be, it appears to be, they're going to side more and more with the attackers, the Arab countries that surround Israel. And God says, don't do that. It'll be a burdensome stone.
Now, Bill, how can people get more information about your ministry? Where do they go?
Well, thank you, Jimmy. It's been wonderful to do this show with you, as usual. They can reach me at prophecydepot.com, Prophecy Depot like Home Depot. Got videos that I've done, some of yours we've got on there. We've also got a YouTube channel. If you search YouTube under Bill Salus, S-A-L-U-S, or Prophecy Depot, D-E-P-O-T. And subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. We're growing there with all kinds of videos. I've got articles and things, my books, and we have a product online bookstore there. The Future War Prophecies, my latest book, is available there with the DVD, and that's prophecydepot.com.
Well, you've got some fantastic books and DVDs. I really encourage everybody to go on your site there, your YouTube channel. Bill, thank you. You're a dear friend, and thank you for being with me today, and we'll have you on again in the future. You're always a great comfort and encouragement in these times, kind of helping us to understand what's going on. God bless you.
God bless you, Jimmy.
Hey, listen, if you're watching this right now on YouTube and you're not a subscriber to endtimes.com, I want you to become a subscriber. Go there, endtimes.com, for $7 a month. You can become a subscriber. You get everything that we do here at endtimes.com. We have several podcasts every week. I answer questions. I give devotionals. I give perspective. In these severe times that we're living in, it's just good to have someone to encourage you and educate you on constantly changing events that are happening in the world right now. Go to endtimes.com. We have a 7-day free trial if you want to check us out. If not, just go ahead and sign up. $7 a month. It will bless you. It will bless us. We love it when people become subscribers because you give us the financial basis through which we can continue coming back to you and also expand this ministry. Thank you for joining me today. I'll see you again next time. Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans. I'm so glad that you've joined me today, and today's program is going to be a little bit shorter because as you're watching this, I'm actually in Washington, D.C. I was invited to come to the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. to have a private briefing with the Israeli government, myself and some other leaders that will be there. And one of the reasons that they're doing this is because there's so much misinformation going on concerning October 7th. And we wrote an article and posted it on endtimes.com talking about a major movement right now that is accusing Israel of planning this entire attack on October 7th, orchestrating the kidnapping and the killing of their own people as a pretext of them invading Gaza, which is absolutely ridiculous. Unfortunately, it's gaining a lot of traction on social media, on TikTok, other places. There's been a lot of this is going around. Now we're seeing the pro-Palestinian rallies where they're actually saying that Israel is the one who did this. They're either saying it didn't happen or Israel's the one who did it. They're behind all this. You know, when it comes to Israel and anti-Semitism, people just are crazy. And I've said this before, anti-Semitism is not an ideology. It's not a belief. It's a spirit. It's demonic. Because no one can really articulate why everybody hates the Jews. And I'll tell you why everybody hates the Jews is because they came from God, because they hate God. Israel's existence is proof of God's existence. The only nation ever started by God was the nation of Israel. He started it with a man named Abram, who became Abraham. And so Israel's existence proves God's existence, and that's why Satan hates it. And that's why people who are ungodly also hate them. Anti-Semitism today is worldwide. It's like a cancer. It's spread all over the world, college campuses, Europe, America, all kinds of people now all over the world, pro-Palestinian rallies, hating Israel, calling for all the different things that they're saying. But now what they're saying is it didn't actually happen. Babies weren't beheaded, little girls and old women weren't raped, and all these people weren't murdered. And if it did happen, the Jews are responsible for it. So I'm as you're watching this right now, I'm actually in Washington, D.C., and I'll be at the Israeli embassy, and they're going to show us footage from October 7th, and that's something I'm not looking forward to seeing. But one of the reasons that they want us to see it is because they want to prove that it actually happened, and it was not the Israelis that did it, it was Hamas that did it. And unfortunately, when these attacks happened on October 7th, because of technology and the way that it is right now, they actually were live feeding the killing of the Jews, the unbelievable carnage that happened when over 1,000 terrorists invaded in the early morning hours the kibbutzes and also just the areas around Gaza there. And see, one of the reasons that they weren't expecting this is because Hamas had been telling Israel that they wanted to normalize relationships and they wanted to enter into a ceasefire. And Israel's never broken a ceasefire. Anytime that there's a ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians or Hamas, they've always honored it. Every ceasefire that's been broken has been broken by Hamas or by the Palestinians. So Israel thought that they had peace with Hamas. And in the early morning hours, they came in and just did this unbelievable thing that they did. There's still many hostages that they're holding in an unbelievable way to manipulate Israel, to try to manipulate Israel, but it's not having the intended effect because Israel is still conducting their raids on Gaza and trying to destroy Hamas completely, and they will destroy Hamas. Regardless of how long it takes them, they will destroy Hamas. But we're going to be watching this footage, and we're going to be also, they're going to be talking to us about, what they want us to do. One of the reasons I'll be there is because they want me to use my influence to help them. And one of the things I want to say to you who are watching this right now, and I know many of you, some of you may be on YouTube, but others, you're endtimes.com subscribers. I just want to say to you, please help me in whatever influence you have to let people know that October 7th was real, and it was real. It actually happened. Babies were beheaded, old people were killed, young people were killed, women were raped, these hostages were taken. It was a shocking demonstration of just barbarianism that happened on October 7th. Israel didn't do it, and it actually happened. Those are the two things we need to let people know. And I told you a couple of weeks ago that there was a pro-Palestinian demonstration less than a mile from my house. And it was shocking to me. I was driving down the street with my granddaughters. They had taken me out to eat lunch. And we were driving down the street and we saw this commotion up here on the side of the road, and we drove up there, and it was about 100 people, but more people were walking in from every direction, and they were waving pro-Palestinian flags and shouting that Israel was committing genocide in Gaza and that Israel was an apartheid state. And so all these kinds of things. It was shocking to me that it was happening in my neighborhood. The other thing that was shocking to me is how many cars were passing by honking in support of them. And this is what's happening. It's very popular to be pro-Palestinian right now. President Biden was giving a speech yesterday, and he was interrupted over a dozen times by these pro-Palestinian demonstrators that were demanding that they stop that they call for a ceasefire in Gaza. And so this nuttiness that's going on, this anti-Semitism that's going on right now, it's one of the major end-time signs, because Zechariah 12, Joel chapter 3, both say that at the very end, all the world will march against Jerusalem. All the world will march against Israel. That's Armageddon. And so, in the past, we've seen anti-Semitism. We've seen it raise its head. But some people would say, and many people have said to me through the years, Jimmy, are you really telling me that this tiny little nation in the Middle East, the size of New Jersey, would be so badly hated that the nations of the world would march against them? And that seemed a little illogical, maybe far-fetched a year ago. Right now, you can see it happening. And so this is an article here. So I'm asking you, first of all, pray for me and the other leaders there. Pray for Israel. in the midst of all of this deception, all this anti-Semitism. But I'm asking you to pray for Israel and use whatever influence you have to let people know that this is real. It was done by Hamas and not by the Israelis. Just whatever influence you might have, might be at school, might be at work, it may be with your friends, it may be with your family, or whatever, it may be online in social media. You stand on behalf of Israel. God says, I'll bless those who bless you, I'll curse those who curse you. And that promise is still true to this day. So let's be among the people who stand with Israel, blessing them and supporting them. But I'm talking about the nation of Israel and what's happening right now in the world. This is an article, and the headline is, EU threatens consequences for Israel's opposition to the Palestinian state. Consequences. Now, I read to you, this is a guy that I'm going to mention here in a minute that I've read to you before. His name is Joseph Borrell. And it says, EU diplomats said on Monday in Brussels that a two-state solution is the only credible path to peace between Israel and the Palestinians after earlier threatening consequences, quote, consequences, if Israel continued to oppose the plan. We have to stop talking about the peace process and start talking about the two-state solution process. Joseph Borrell, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, told press at a meeting at the Council of the European Union's Foreign Affairs Committee. Now, you remember I read this article a couple of weeks ago. He's calling for forced two-state solution. This is Armageddon. This is what happens when the world marches against Israel to try to force them into a two-state solution. Now, it's going to happen someday. Now, I've been saying to you, there's going to be wars and all the pressure that's happening right now worldwide. The world, the Biden administration, the America, the EU, the United Nations, International Criminal Court, they're all trying to pressure Israel into this two-state solution. It's not going to happen. And Benjamin Netanyahu has been very, very specific about the fact he's not going for it. And so this is an opinion piece now in the Jerusalem Post. And it's by Linda Allen. And she says, after 18 years of abuse of power, Palestinians are undeserving of self-rule in Gaza. And so 18 years of abuse of power, the Hamas was, their purpose was to destroy Israel. That's why they broke off from Fatah and the Palestinian Authority. Is Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, through the Oslo Accords, they recognized Israel's right to exist. Now, they've never really followed through on that in any practical way, but they recognized Israel's right to exist. Hamas would not recognize Israel's right to exist, and they existed for the purpose of destroying Israel. That's why Iran pumped hundreds of millions of dollars in there for them to build 500 miles of tunnels underneath. And this is an interesting thing. And Larry Huck said this on the show a couple of weeks ago. They have 500 miles of tunnels under Gaza, but they don't have one bunker for their citizens to hide in if there's an attack. And so they're all for the soldiers, they're all for the military, and they have used Gaza as a military installation to attack and destroy Israel. That's why Israel built a fence around it, because they had to protect themselves from Hamas, because Hamas's intentions since 2005 have always been evil toward Israel. And what they're saying is, because of the abuse of power, Hamas abused their own citizens. Hamas used their power to just try to destroy Israel. And so Benjamin Netanyahu said, we're going to go in and finish our operation in Gaza. We're going to destroy Hamas, and we will have a security force in Gaza from now on to make sure that they don't do this again. Now, this Joseph Borrell, EU, he's saying there's going to be consequences if you continue to resist this. They're going to resist this. And let me tell you why they're going to resist this. In 2005, under the George W. Bush administration, we forced Israel out of Gaza. Interestingly, 5 days later, Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast, the costliest natural disaster in American history up to that point in time. And immediately Jewish rabbis came out and said, that's because you forced us out of our land. That's what Joel 3 says, is that God is going to come into judgment with the nations on account of what they've done with Israel, and they've divided up his land. So the United States, in this Land for Peace operation, we forced Israel out of Gaza. Gaza is a lucrative piece of land on the Mediterranean. It is unbelievably fertile. It could be a Singapore. It could be an incredible, piece of property under the right hands. But Gaza's used it just for war purposes. And so in 2005, we forced Israel out with the promise of peace. If you give, they just want land. They just want land. And if you'll give them this land, you're going to have peace. Well, what happened? The most incredible demonstration of savagery on October 7th, because of the United States and the United Nations forcing Israel to give up this land in the name of peace. And now we see this carnage. And the most amazing thing is, rather than the world rallying behind Israel, many Christians have rallied behind Israel. The world has turned against Israel. And now they're condemning Israel, and they're saying this is genocide. Genocide is when you wipe out a group of people. There are 2 million residents of Gaza. Right now, the last death toll I heard of the Israelis killing Hamas, and there's been some citizens that died, was 24,000. Okay, well, that's a little over 1%. Genocide is 100%. You go in and you just kill people. The Israelis have done everything they can to preserve life. It's Hamas that has built their military installations under nurseries, preschools, elementary schools, hospitals, and in residential neighborhood. They use their people as a shield. The Israelis don't do that. The Israelis protect their citizens and the Palestinian citizens. They don't go in and just carelessly kill civilians.